I remember hearing this guy screaming. This guy just screaming his head off, maybe 2 feet from me, in the middle of the shower house area. There was this guy. He was just leaking all over the place. He had holes all in him. He had a hole in his neck and his face and all over his chest. And then I heard people laughing. I heard a bunch of people laughing. And I remember looking deeply into this guy's eyes and he was just in there screaming. It does leave a lasting impression on you, your psyche, and it can transform you, that you become something that you never in your wildest nightmares would think of becoming. Greetings and salutations, I'm Victor Sordi, and thanks for watching my channel at 28 to Persevere. Earlier today I was asked a question from someone. It was a loaded question. They asked me, what was the worst experience you ever had in prison? Now, to quantify or marginalize my experience to a single one is really impossible to do. Cumulatively, my experience was horrific across the board. There are certain things that I did see or witness to or experience single-handedly on a personal level that were and are more horrific than another one. But overall, the experience is in of itself horrific by its very nature, being in the situation that I was in. I went to prison as a 19-year-old kid, so the maturation process, some people can say, was completely and utterly skewered by what I saw. And then on the flip side of that, I was forced to grow up pretty quick and become extremely mature extremely fast in order to survive. I had to see things that a normal 19-year-old kid will never see or have to experience in his life. Thank the gods for that. There are a few things that I experienced that stand out as far as the horrific nature of it was concerned, more so than other experiences. One such experience took place in the shower house. The shower house is where the prisoners go to wash their ass when they're out in the yard. This particular time, this particular experience that I had, I remember I was in my mid-20s at the time, and I was in Auburn probably for about 7, 8, maybe 9 years. And I got finished working out on the weight pit, and I went towards the shower house. And the shower house was located in a building that you had to walk through a gated area to get to from the yard. And then you went and entered a corridor, a long corridor. It took you to a flight of stairs. It took you about 3 stories up into a huge, what looked like a factory, with nozzles sticking out from the ceiling and the walls. And there was a shower house, shower nozzles. And it was a closed off area. And at that time, there was no guards or anyone really located there. A lot of horrific shit would pop off there. A lot of violence would ensue. And I saw various stabbings and cuttings and other horrific stuff that transpired up in the shower house room. But I remember this one time I went up there, and when I went into the shower house, I remember it was really foggy because of the steam, so I really couldn't see much. But I remember standing there and me and my gear, and there was someone else that was with me because you always had kind of like a buddy system in prison. You all went up to the shower house together to watch each other's back and whatever, because a lot of shit, like I said, popped off at the shower house. But I remember this one particular time I went out there with a guy that I was with, and we were getting ready to hit the shower, and I'm sitting there with my boxers on, and I remember hearing this guy screaming. This guy just screaming his head off and through the steam, and then all of a sudden I heard this loud sound, this like thud, big thud and splashing of water. I remember looking down, and literally like maybe 2 feet from me, in the middle of the shower house area, there was this guy. He was just leaking all over the place. I mean, he had blood all over him, and he was hit up a bunch of times. Somebody gunned him down, with whatever they had. And I remember he had holes all in him. He had a hole in his neck and his face and all over his chest, his arms. He was stabbed multiple times. You could see whoever hit him was trying to kill him, and I'm pretty sure it was more than one guy that hit him. I had no idea who the guy was, and I just remember looking at him and just sitting there staring at this guy. And he's screaming and hollering, and then I hear people laughing. I heard a bunch of people laughing, and I'm assuming it was more those that hit him up. I remember looking at the guy next to me, and I turned my head like, what the fuck is this? And I looked down at this guy, and I remember looking in this guy's eyes. He looked right up at me. His whole face was covered in blood. I mean, his entire, like, as far as his disposition was concerned, it was basically disfigured because of the holes in his face. And this incident stood out to me because I remember looking deeply into this guy's eyes, and he was just in there screaming. And needless to say, what do you do? I mind my business in prison, so I turned my head and I walked out from the shower house, grabbed my gear, and slowly started getting changed. And with the other guy that I went up to the shower house with, and we got the fuck out of there. And I just remember hearing all the laughter and seeing this guy's face, and the laughter always stuck to me, always kind of stuck in my mind. Hearing all guys laughing about what was just occurred with this guy. And the guy was, obviously bare chested, and he had his boxers on too, but they were so filled with blood, they were red and bright red. I remember the blood all over the guy. Really stood out to me, that experience. I mean, I saw a lot of more horrific, as far as guys getting acid thrown in their faces and hot oil, and cooked up caramel and stuff of that nature. So I've seen, pretty gruesome things, probably more grotesque. But I remember that in particular incident that stood out to me because of what I saw in the guy's eyes, the helplessness, the fear, the uncertainty, the confusion. It really affected me. I remember that day. I was real quiet after that. I was processing that and thinking to myself, I didn't know that guy from hole in the wall, and nor did I have any desire to. And my first reaction, was just to get the hell out of there, as was the guy we was with. Because, like I said, it didn't concern us; it wasn't our business. But I remember this guy, and he was running towards us because he must have heard us come through the shower house. And I heard that big thump and big thud into the ground, hitting the floor. And you hit the floor with all the water splashing because from the shower house and shower nozzles. But I remember that vividly. Pretty horrific experience. And I don't know whatever happened to that guy. I don't even really recall the guards being notified of it and running up or anything like that. I have no idea how that unfolded or what the conclusion of that was. But I do remember that vividly at my early 20s. In prison, you realize you lose yourself to find yourself. And that's pretty universal inside the joint. Most guys lose touch with their better selves to a large extent by bearing witness to so much horrific shit. When you see the things you see daily, it starts to become a permanent fixture in your life. You get imprints on your brain, certain images, certain ways of thinking that to the average Joe or Jane, they could never relate to, they can never truly understand. And to reiterate it and elaborate upon it doesn't really just do it any types of real justice to show the full extent of how horrific it is to bear witness to the things you see while inside. Seeing people being stabbed or cut or just fights every day. I mean, a simple fisticuff or whatnot, which was rare in itself, a simple fisticuff. But bearing witness to so much violence on a constant loop, you really have to really dig deep within your better self and not lose touch with yourself, not lose touch with who you are and what you represent. You have to lay claim to your principles and hold tight to them because and every day they're going to be tested and you're going to be pulled at the seams of sanity. What you believe was real or not real and what is fiction is all convoluted now. Your life becomes a constant struggle to survive and to bob and weave and to avoid the madness all around you, the chaos, the negative forces of chaos that are so profoundly affecting every action of your life. You learn now to become more receptive to what it will take for you to tap into your reserves of strength, to really understand your intestinal fortitude, and what it will be for you to confront these things on a daily basis and still be who you are, who you believe yourself to be, not becoming completely associated with identifying to the things you see around you every day. Because make no mistake about it, it does leave a lasting impression on you, your psyche. and it can transform you and metamorphosize your brain and way of thinking, that you become something that you never in your wildest nightmares would think of becoming. I've seen it on a personal level. I've seen guys that, for all intents and purposes, were decent dudes. Under the circumstances, they carried themselves like gentlemen. But over time, bear witness to the horrific nature of everyday life, they then became infused with this type of thinking where they had to think and act like the savages around them. You have to be a savage at times. Sometimes it's impossible to be a gentleman, and I get that. I had to tap into my savage nature at times, and as I would call it, the berserker. You'd have to think like a berserker to a large extent. But I tried to keep it under wraps and control, understanding that's the true test of strength, controlling your temperament. Everybody else is losing theirs. But I saw a lot of guys lose themselves and completely lose their shit and just become extremely violent at the drop of a hat, never really considering how to think in the alternative. To them, there was no alternative. Just respond, react, violent every day. Violence, violence, and more violence. And it's hard to sit there and think like the average Joe or Jane would think, because you're no longer thinking like that, not living around them. I mean, it's an asphalt jungle, and there's savages all around you, and you have to be aware of what the savages are thinking, or you're not going to make it out of there. Thanks for watching. Head on over to Instagram and hit me up. Press my link. Check out some of my merch in support of this channel if you so feel inclined to do so. It's very much appreciated. Until next time, go with the gods. Persevere.